The screaming started at 03 for 7 hours. Commander Velth Rennick of the Kitherian Stellar Command watched through reinforced transparistell as his most elite telepathic interrogators convulsed on the chamber floor, their elongated craniums splitting open like overripe fruit. Purple ichor pulled beneath their twitching forms while neural feedback alarms shrieked through the detention facility. "Shut it down," Rennick barked, his forearms gesturing frantically at the control panels. "Cut the psychic link now, to late." The fifth telepath, Senior Mindreader Kef Varos, had already made contact with the human prisoner's consciousness. His bulbous eyes rolled back, showing only white, before erupting in a shower of crystalline fluid. He toppled backward, his breathing apparatus torn from his mouth as he gasped his final words. The fires, the endless fires. The human sat unchanged in the center of the interrogation chamber, thick restraints binding his wrists and ankles to the metal chair. Captain Marcus Aldridge, according to the intercepted Coalition files, appeared utterly ordinary average height, brown hair, unremarkable features. Nothing about him suggested he could kill trained psychics with mere thoughts. "Sir," whispered technical specialist Yorvin, his voice trembling as he monitored the biometric displays. "The neural pattern readings, they're unlike anything in our databases. The human's mind isn't just resistant to telepathic intrusion, it's actively hostile." Rennick's secondary arms flexed with barely contained rage. For 3 cycles, the Kitherian Empire had swept through human space like a plague wind, their telepathic advantage allowing them to predict every military stratagem, every defensive position, every desperate gambit the Coalition forces attempted. Reading human minds had been laughably simple, their thoughts scattered. A week compared to Kitherian mental discipline. Until now, how many of our mind readers have we lost to this creature? Rennick demanded. 17, sir. Every attempt to breach his mental barriers results in immediate psychic trauma. The survivors describe visions of fire, screaming, and something they call the darkness between stars. The commander studied the human through the observation window. Aldridge hadn't spoken since his capture near the Kepler Station debris field, where his single corvette had somehow obliterated an entire Kitherian battle squadron. The tactical recordings made no sense. His ship had been outgunned 50 to 1. Yet the wreckage told a different story. "Bring me the Devourer," Rennick commanded. His subordinates recoiled. The Devourer was their most powerful telepath, capable of liquefying minds across star systems. It had never failed to extract information from any species they'd encountered. "Sir, if the humans' defenses are strong enough to kill our standard interrogators, then we escalate." Rennick's mandibles clicked with determination. "The human fleet is massing at the Vega confluence. Without intelligence on their defensive positions, our 4th wave assault will fail. We need what's in that creature's head." As if sensing their discussion, Aldridge raised his head for the first time in hours. His eyes found Rennick through the transparistell, and something cold passed between them, a promise of violence that transcended species barriers. The human's lips moved silently, forming words that the translation matrix couldn't capture. But Rennick didn't need technology to understand the message. It was written in the man's expression, in the way his muscles tensed against the restraints, in the predatory stillness that settled over him like a shroud. The Devourer arrived within the hour, its massive form barely fitting through the facility's corridors. Unlike the other telepaths, this creature possessed no physical vulnerability. Its consciousness existed as pure psychic energy, housed within a crystalline matrix. It had devoured the minds of entire worlds. "This human has already cost us our best interrogators," Rennick explained as the entity positioned itself before the chamber. Whatever mental defenses it possesses, the Devourer's response came as a wave of contempt that left Rennick's ears bleeding. "Weak minds. I will strip this creature's consciousness layer by layer until nothing remains." But screaming instinct, through the observation window, they watched as the Devourer extended tendrils of pure thought toward the human skull. The psychic interface crackled with energy as it made contact, probing for entry points in Aldridge's mental barriers. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Marcus Aldridge smiled. The Devourer's crystalline form began to crack, hairline fractures spreading like spider webs across its surface. The entity's psychic scream tore through the facility's mental shielding, dropping every Kitherian within a kilometer to their knees. What are you?" The Devourer's final transmission came as a whisper of terror before its matrix shattered completely, releasing 3,000 years of accumulated knowledge into the void. In the sudden silence, Aldridge spoke for the first time since his capture. His voice was steady, almost conversational. "You wanted to see inside a human mind," he said, his gaze fixed on Rennick's horrified expression. "Congratulations. You've just glimpsed what we call Tuesday." The emergency klaxons hadn't stopped wailing since the Devourer's destruction 6 hours ago. Commander Rennick stood in the war room, his forearms trembling as he reviewed the casualty reports. Every telepath within 50 kilometers of the detention facility had suffered some form of neural damage. Most were catatonic, endlessly mumbling about the burning children and glass cities melting. "Sir, the fleet commanders are demanding answers," reported Intelligence Coordinator Thex Malver, her chitinous carapace clicking nervously. "The fourth wave assault begins in 18 hours, and without telepathic reconnaissance, I'm aware of our situation," Rennick snapped, his mandibles grinding. "What's the status of the human prisoner?" "Unchanged. He's been singing, sir." Through the detention facility's audio feed, Marcus Aldridge's voice drifted softly through the speakers. An old Earth song, something about distant shores and coming home. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, and somehow that made it worse. "The medical teams have concluded their analysis of the Devourer's remains," Malver continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. "The entity didn't just die from psychic feedback. It appears to have been systematically dismantled from within, as if something in the human's mind deliberately guided it to self-destructs." Rennick's stomach lurched. Into centuries of conquest, the Catherians had never encountered a species capable of weaponizing their own thoughts. Their telepathic abilities were their greatest advantage, the cornerstone of their empire's expansion. "Bring me Senior Tactical Analyst Vex Corum," he ordered, "and summon the Architect." Malver's antennae twitched with alarm. "Sir, the Architect hasn't emerged from the deep sanctum in 40 cycles. The ritual required to wake it. Do it." Wow. His subordinates scurried to fulfill his commands. Rennick accessed the classified's analogical databases. If humans possessed some form of natural psychic defense, there had to be historical precedent. The files painted a disturbing picture: scattered reports from early contact missions, unexplained telepath casualties, fragments of data that previous commanders had dismissed as equipment failures or incompetence. Tactical Analyst Corum arrived first, his massive frame hunched with exhaustion. The veteran strategist had orchestrated victories across 17 star systems, but defeat clearly weighed heavily on his shoulders. "You studied the human's vessel," Rennick began without preamble. "How did a single corvette destroy squadron?" Vaktath, Corum activated the holographic display, showing the battle's reconstruction. "The tactical data makes no sense. The human ship shouldn't have survived the first volley. Yet it eliminated our dreadnought before the crew could establish psychic coordination." Explain. "Our standard doctrine relies on telepathic battle meld unified consciousness across all vessels. But watch this." The hologram rewound, showing the moment of engagement. The human ship fired into empty space, but our formation moved directly into the weapon's fire. As if our tactical coordination was being anticipated, a chill ran through Rennick's exoskeleton. "You're suggesting the human could predict our movements?" "Not predict, sir. I believe he was reading our telepath's minds while they read his, using our own psychic network against us." The implications were staggering. If humans could reverse telepathic intrusion, turn it into a weapon, then every advantage the Catherian Empire possessed became a liability. The chamber's massive doors groaned open, admitting a creature that defied easy description. The Architect had been old when the Catherian homeworld was young, a fusion of organic tissue and quantum machinery that existed partially outside normal space-time. Its presence made reality itself feel negotiable. "Why have you disturbed my contemplations?" The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, pressing against their minds like a physical weight. "The humans," Rennick managed. "One of them killed the Devourer. Our telepaths are dying whenever they attempt mental contact." The Architect's form shifted, probability waves rippling around its mass. "Show me." Rennick activated the detention facilities feed. The Architect's attention focused on Marcus Aldridge, who had stopped singing and now sat perfectly still, as if aware of the ancient entity's scrutiny. For several minutes, the Architect studied the human. Then its form began to contract, pulling away from the psychic interface. "Fascinating. This creature's mind is not defending itself." "What do you mean?" "It is not generating barriers or shields. Instead, it allows full psychic penetration and then shares." "Shares what?" The Architect's response came with an overlay of images: cities burning, children screaming, the slow dissolution of everything they held dear. Rennick staggered under the psychic assault, his mind's reeling. Human memory, human experience, human history, they have made an art form of suffering, and their minds are archives of every atrocity their species has endured or inflicted. When our telepaths attempt intrusion, they experience not just one human's memories, but the collective trauma of their entire civilization. The war room fell silent except for the continued wailing of alarms. Malvro was the first to speak. How do they function with such burdens? They have evolved to carry the weight of genocide, slavery, war, and extinction. What breaks our minds merely shapes theirs. Rennick felt his certainty crumbling. The fourth wave assault was built around telepathic coordination. If human minds could weaponize their own suffering, can we shield our telepaths? Find some way to protect them. During intrusion, the architect's laugh was the sound of stars dying. One does not shield against a supernova. One simply chooses not to stand in its path. Through the speakers, Marcus Aldridge had resumed singing. The melody was different now, something martial and grim, a marching song that spoke of duty and sacrifice. It was beautiful and terrible, like everything else about his species. The humans are coming, the architect whispered before fading back into dimensional obscurity. And we have just learned that our greatest weapon is their gift. The first wave of human ships dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kitherian defensive perimeter. Exactly 18 hours later, Commander Rennick watched from the bridge of the battlecruiser Eternal Dominion as his sensor operators counted the vessels to 100 coalition ships against his assembled fleet of 800. Under normal circumstances, the odds would have been laughable. All telepathic coordination networks are offline, reported Fleet Coordinator Yix Nelvik, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. The Psychic Corps refuses to establish battle meld after what happened to the Devourer. Rennick cursed in 3 different languages without their telepathic advantage. Kitherian fleet doctrine collapsed into chaos. Their entire military philosophy depended on unified consciousness, hundreds of ships acting as a single organism guided by collective thought. Sir, the human fleet is broadcasting on all frequencies, announced communications specialist Horuk. Put it through. The voice that filled the bridge belonged to Marcus Aldridge. Somehow, the prisoner had escaped containment and reached the coalition forces. His tone remained conversational, almost friendly. Commander Rennick, I believe we need to discuss terms. Rennick's mandibles clicked with rage. You're outnumbered 4-1. Your position is hopeless, is it? Your telepaths are having nightmares about my memories, and your fleet can't coordinate without psychic unity. Meanwhile, my people have been fighting wars since before your species discovered fire. We're rather good at it. The human fleet began to move, and Rennick realized immediately that something was wrong. Their formation patterns were impossibly complex vessels weaving through space, in perfect synchronization despite the absence of any detectable communication. It was as if they shared a collective consciousness. How are they coordinating without telepathy? Nelvik whispered through the speakers. Aldridge chuckled. Commander, you've been studying us for 3 years. Did you never wonder why humans survived the Plague Wars, or the Great Collapse, or any of the 17 separate extinction events we've endured? The human formation suddenly split, becoming a 3-dimensional maze of overlapping fire patterns. Rennick's tactical computers couldn't track their movements. Every projection ended in Kitherian defeat. We learned to think as one mind distributed across billions of bodies, Aldridge continued. Not through psychic links, but through shared purpose, shared suffering, shared determination to survive, no matter the cost. The first exchange of firelit space with deadly aurora. Kitherian particle beams lanced out in perfect synchronization, only to find empty vacuum where human ships had been moments before. Return fire struck with surgical precision, crippling Kitherian vessels without destroying them completely. They're targeting our propulsion systems, Nelvik reported, disabling rather than destroying. Why would they? Rennick stopped as understanding dawned. They want prisoners, more telepaths for their psychological warfare. The battle continued for 6 hours. And it wasn't a battle at all, it was a demonstration. The human fleet moved like a single organism, anticipating Kitherian maneuvers with impossible accuracy. When Rennick ordered his ships to scatter, they found human vessels waiting for them. When he attempted concentrated assault, the enemy formation flowed around his attacks like water. Most disturbing of all were the human tactics. They fought with a casual brutality that spoke of vast experience. Boarding pods launched not at critical systems, but at crew quarters, designed to capture rather than kill. Virus torpedoes that shut down computers without damaging life support. Weapons that inflicted maximum psychological impact with minimal casualties, sir. Squadron Next Scatter is reporting telepathic intrusion, Horik announced. The humans have boarding parties inside their vessels. Impossible. Our shields. The humans aren't using telepathy, sir. They're using our captured telepaths. Through the tactical display, Rennick watched as his own psychic specialists, now under human control, guided coalition boarding parties through Kitherian ships. The turned telepaths provided perfect intelligence ship layouts, security protocols, crew positions. It was elegant, efficient, and utterly ruthless. The cruiser Void Render is requesting immediate extraction, Nelvik reported. Their entire command crew has been compromised. The humans are reading their minds and broadcasting the contents fleet-wide. Personal memories, tactical secrets, family connections, all of it streamed across the communication channels. In a deliberate psychological assault, Kitherian crews found themselves fighting not just human ships, but the ghosts of their own. Bots, now weaponized against them, pulled back to secondary positions, Rennick ordered. Established defensive perimeter around the detention facility, but the humans followed, their formation morphing to match Kitherian movements. Where the Imperial fleet sought to create killing fields, the coalition vessels wove counter patterns that turned every advantage into a liability. Through it all, Marcus Aldridge's voice continued its commentary, dissecting Kitherian tactics with the casual expertise of a born predator. Your formation discipline is excellent, Commander, but it relies too heavily on telepathic coordination. Without that unity, your 800 individual ships trying to fight as one mind. We're 200 minds that learn to fight as one species. A new sound joined the broadcast singing, hundreds of human voices raised in harmony. Not the peaceful melody Aldridge had used in captivity, but something older and darker. A war song that spoke of blood and sacrifice, of victory purchased with the bones of the fallen. What is that? Nelvik whispered. That, Aldridge replied. Somehow hearing the question across the void is the sound of a species that refuses to die. We've been singing it for 10,000 years, Commander, through plague and fire, through the death of worlds and the collapse of empires. It's our gift to you, the last thing you'll hear before you join the harmony. The human fleet began its final approach, and Rennick realized with crystalline clarity that his empire's expansion was over. They had encountered something worse than a superior enemy. They had found a species that transformed suffering into strength, that weaponized their own trauma and shared it with murderous generosity. In the detention facility's ruins, where 17 telepaths had died trying to read a single human mind, emergency lights flickered over empty restraints and pools of purple ichor. Marcus Aldridge was long gone, but his laughter still echoed through the corridors, joined now by the voices of 200,000 coalition personnel, singing their species to victory. The screaming had stopped hours ago. Now there was only the song. Commander Rennick's desperate gambit came at 2,000 to 147 hours, when it became clear that conventional warfare was impossible. If telepathic coordination was compromised, he would abandon it entirely, scuttle the fleet doctrine that had conquered 17 star systems, and revert to something the humans wouldn't expect. All vessels, emergency protocol Kethmaros, he transmitted across the scattered remains of his fleet. Individual unit commanders assume tactical autonomy, break formation, engage at will, ignore central coordination. It was military heresy, the abandonment of everything that made Kitherian forces superior. But desperation bred innovation, and Rennick gambled that chaos might succeed where order had failed. The effect was immediate and devastating for both sides. Freed from the rigid formation patterns that human intelligence had decoded, Kitherian ships began fighting like the vicious predators their species had been before civilization. No patterns to anticipate, no coordination to exploit, just 800 individual vessels driven by survival instinct and racial fury. The human fleet, caught off guard by the sudden tactical shift, suffered their first significant casualties. The coalition cruiser New Prometheus vanished in a fireball as 3 Kitherian destroyers converged on it simultaneously. The medical frigate Mercy's hand died screaming as boarding pods filled with enraged Kitherian warriors tore through its corridors, but humanity's response revealed why they had survived extinction 17 times. They adapted. All ships, Pattern Omega-7, came a new voice, across the human frequencies Admiral Vasquez Cortez, Marcus Aldridge's commanding officer. Her tone carried the weight of someone who had fought through the Centauri genocide and lived to remember it. Individual vessel commanders assume hunter-killer protocols. The enemy wants chaos? Give them chaos. What followed was a masterclass in applied brutality that lasted 14 hours. It left both fleets bleeding into the void. Catherian vessels, designed for coordinated assault, found themselves hunted by human ships that moved like pack predators. When the destroyer Bone Cleaver attempted to ambush a coalition supply convoy, it was intercepted by the corvette Vindictive Memory, Marcus Aldridge's old command. The engagement lasted 6 minutes and ended with the Catherian crew ejected into space, their ship commandeered by a human boarding party led by Aldridge himself. This is how we learn to fight. His voice crackled across all frequencies as he transmitted from the captured vessel's bridge. Not as a unified fleet, but as individual survivors who refuse to surrender. Every human ship out here carries the memory of worlds that died screaming. We're not just fighting for victory, we're fighting so our children never have to. The psychology was as devastating as the tactics. Catherian crews, isolated from telepathic support, found themselves facing an enemy that seemed to know exactly how to inflict maximum psychological damage. Human boarding parties didn't just capture ships, they broadcast the contents of Catherian minds, sharing private fears and shameful memories across the battlefield. Commander Vorzekiel of the heavy cruiser Dark Talon watched in horror as his personal communications with his offspring were played back through the ship's intercom system. His crew, learning of his favoritism and political maneuvering, turned on him with barely contained rage. The ship's efficiency collapsed into infighting just as human Marines breached the hull. They're not just winning, reported intelligence coordinator Malver from her refugee position aboard Rennick's flagship. They're breaking us psychologically. Every captured vessel becomes a weapon against our morale. The turning point came when Squadron Leader Yex Thorin, commanding 6 Catherian battleships in a desperate assault on the human medical vessels, discovered that mercy was another human weapon. Instead of destroying the wounded ships, the coalition forces offered medical assistance to both sides. The broadcast went out on all frequencies, human medics treating Catherian wounded, sharing medical supplies, performing surgery on enemy combatants with the same care they showed their own species. It was genuine compassion, and somehow that made it more terrifying than any weapon. What kind of species, Thorin whispered into his comm system, shows mercy in the middle of a war? Marcus Aldridge answered from the captured Bone Cleaver, his voice carrying quiet authority, the kind that remembers what it's like to lose everything. We've been where you are now, Commander. We've felt our worlds burn and our children die. The difference is, we learned that survival isn't about being the strongest predator, it's about being the species that helps others survive too. The psychological warfare reached its climax when Admiral Cortez transmitted a message that stopped the battle entirely. Commander Rennick stared at the tactical display, showing human ships risking themselves to save Catherian lives, and realized that his empire had encountered something far more dangerous than superior military technology. They had found a species that had learned to weaponize forgiveness. The battle was over, not because one side had been destroyed, but because continuing to fight had become morally impossible. In the silence that followed the ceasefire, with rescue operations ongoing throughout the debris field, a single question echoed through both fleets. What do you do when your enemy refuses to let you be their enemy? The temporary ceasefire shattered when Catherian High Command made their final, desperate play. 3 hours after the rescue operations began, hyperspace rifts tore open across the battlefield as the Empire's first Armada 2000 ships, commanded by Supreme War Leader Kex Valmor, translated into normal space. This wasn't Rennick's defensive fleet of cruisers and destroyers. This was the concentrated military might of a star-spanning empire, including the massive dreadnought World Ender that had glassed entire systems, all human vessels. This is Admiral Cortez, came the transmission across coalition frequencies. The gloves are off. Pattern Armageddon full engagement. The mercy that had defined the previous battle evaporated like morning frost under a nuclear sun. What followed was 47 hours of continuous combat that turned the Kepler Nebula into a graveyard of shattered metal and dying light. No quarter asked, none given to species fighting for their very existence with weapons that could crack planets. Supreme War Leader Valmoric opened the engagement by targeting the human medical vessels that had been treating Catherian wounded. The frigate Compassion's light died instantly under concentrated dreadnought fire, its hull vaporizing along with 300 human medics and twice as many Kytherian patients. Marcus Aldridge's response came 30 seconds later. The captured Kytherian destroyer Bone Cleaver, now crewed by coalition forces, fired not at military targets, but at Valmorak's flagship directly. The message was clear. If mercy was weakness, humanity would abandon it entirely. You want to see what we're really capable of. Aldridge's voice cut through the tactical chatter. Fine. Let us show you why 17 extinction events couldn't kill our species. The human fleet transformed. Gone were the careful maneuvers and surgical strikes. In their place came something primal and terrible warfare as practiced by a species that had learned to kill gods. Coalition ships began ramming attacks, their crews singing funeral dirges as they piloted damaged vessels into Kytherian formations. The corvette Last Stand took a direct hit from a plasma cannon. Its hull breached in atmosphere venting, but instead of retreating, its captain ordered full acceleration into the enemy battleship Cruel Mercy. Both ships died in a fusion fire that painted space white hot for 17 minutes. But the Kytherians had their own rage to fuel them. Centuries of conquest, of telepathic dominance, of believing themselves the superior species, all of it concentrated into pure military fury. The dreadnought World Ender, carved through human formations like a sword through silk, its particle beams vaporizing anything smaller than a heavy cruiser. Supreme War Leader Valmorak personally commanded the ship's weapons, targeting rescue vessels and supply convoys with methodical precision. These creatures showed mercy to our wounded. He transmitted to his fleet, such weakness will not survive contact with true warfare. The coalition response came from Admiral Cortez herself, her flagship Indomitable Spirit leading a desperate charge directly at the massive dreadnought. 50 human ships followed her in what tactical analysts would later call the most beautiful suicide in military history. The engagement lasted for hours and cost both sides nearly half their remaining forces. Human vessels died in sheets of plasma fire. Their crews broadcast their final messages to loved ones light years away. Kytherian ships cracked open like eggs under focused nuclear bombardment, their exotic matter cores detonating in miniature supernovas. At the center of the carnage, Marcus Aldridge fought with the calculating fury that had made him famous. The Bone Cleaver darted between capital ships like a predatory fish, its human crew having learned to operate Kytherian technology with deadly efficiency. When an enemy cruiser Bone Harvest attempted to ram them, Aldridge simply opened a hole in space using the ship's quantum torpedoes and let his opponent's momentum carry them into dimensional oblivion. This is what you wanted, he broadcast to the Kytherian fleet as he watched their ships die. This is what humanity looked like when we stopped pretending to be civilized. The tide turned when both fleets simultaneously realized they were destroying themselves for no tactical gain. Ships on both sides had been fighting for 2 full days, their crews sustained only by combat stimulants and pure hatred. Ammunition was running low, reactor cores were failing, and the casualty count had reached genocidal proportions. It was Supreme War Leader Valmorak who blinked first, faced with the destruction of his entire armada, watching human ships fight like rabid animals that refused to die. He made the same decision that had broken Rennick's nerve. He opened communications. Enough. Came his transmission across all frequencies. Enough. We cannot. This cannot continue. The World Ender powered down its weapons, hanging dead in space surrounded by the debris of 800 destroyed vessels. Human ships, many of them held together by little more than hope and emergency patches, slowly ceased fire. In the sudden silence, bodies drifted between the wreck's human and Kytherian corpses spinning together in the void, their species ancient, enmity reduced to shared death. Admiral Cortez's response came from the bridge of her crippled flagship, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had watched her people die for 2 straight days. War Leader Valmorak, this is Admiral Cortez. You have 15 minutes to justify why we shouldn't finish what you started. Through the tactical displays, both commanders could see the true cost of their fury: 40,000 dead humans, 60,000 dead Kytherians, and enough destroyed ships to fill a small moon. The survivors floated in the wreckage of their civilization's first meeting, breathing recycled air and bleeding into their pressure suits. Marcus Aldridge broke the silence with a transmission that reached both fleets. This is what war looks like when both sides refuse to surrender. We can keep killing each other until there's nothing left but radiation and regret. Or we can remember that we're both species that survived extinction. Your choice, the choice, as it turned out, would define the future of two civilizations. But first, there were 47 hours worth of dead to count. The counting of the dead took 6 hours, 43,817 human casualties, 61,206 Cytherian deaths. Numbers that represented not just military losses, but the systematic destruction of two species' finest. Pilots who would never see home again. Engineers whose innovations died with them. Medics who had chosen healing over hatred only to be consumed by the fire they tried to prevent. Marcus Aldridge floated through the wreckage in a salvaged Cytherian EVA suit, moving from ship to ship in the aftermath silence. His task was simple and terrible: locate survivors, coordinate rescue efforts, and try to make sense of the carnage both sides had inflicted. The Bone Cleaver had taken critical damage in the final hours of battle. Half his crew was dead, the other half kept alive by emergency life support that would fail within the next 36 hours. Around him, similar scenes played out across both fleet. Ships turned into flying coffins, their crews trapped in metal tombs waiting for rescue that might never come. Marcus, the voice came through his suit's communication system. Admiral Cortez, calling from the ruins of her flagship. The indomitable Spirit had lost main power, artificial gravity, and most of its navigation systems. She was effectively stranded. Admiral, what's your status? Dying slowly instead of quickly. You? It was such a perfectly human response that Aldridge found himself laughing despite everything. Even at the edge of extinction, their species maintained its sense of dark humor. Same, though I've been thinking. Dangerous habit. What about? Aldridge guided his EVA pack through a field of debris toward the coordinates where Supreme War Leader Valmorak's flagship drifted powerless. The world ender had taken massive damage, but remained structurally intact, a testament to Cytherian engineering and their commander's refusal to retreat. About what the architect said about how humans carry the weight of genocide, slavery, war, and extinction. How it shapes us instead of breaking us, and I think we've been looking at this wrong. Aldridge reached the Cytherian dreadnought's hull and began searching for intact airlocks. We assumed their telepathic abilities made them our enemies. But what if it just made them afraid? Through his suit's visor, he could see movement inside the ship. Cytherian crew members working frantically to repair critical systems. They were dying too, just as trapped as the humans, just as desperate to survive. Marcus, please tell me you're not about to do something incredibly stupid. Define stupid. He found a functioning airlock and began the dangerous process of matching. Pressure seals, standard xenological protocol demanded armed escorts, full hazmat containment, and approval from 3 separate command authorities. Instead, Marcus Aldridge knocked politely on the enemy's door. The airlock cycled, and he found himself face to face with Supreme War Leader Valmorak himself. The Cytherian commander was injured, purple ichor seeping from cracks in his exoskeleton, but his forearms still moved with deadly precision as he raised what appeared to be a plasma pistol. So, Valmorak said in accented but clear English, "The famous Marcus Aldridge comes calling. Have you come to gloat over our defeat? Actually, I came to offer you a ride." The weapon wavered. "What? Your ship is dying. My ship is dying. Your people are trapped. My people are trapped. But if we pool our resources, Cytherian technology, human engineering, maybe some of us live to see tomorrow." Valmorak's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of either aggression or confusion. "This is a trick, some human stratagem. War Leader, look around you." Aldridge gestured at the devastation visible through the ship's viewports. "What would be the point? We've already destroyed each other. Your empire's first armada is scrap metal. My people's finest fleet is dying in the void. The only victory left is survival." For several heartbeats, the two commanders faced each other across the species divide. Then Valmorak lowered his weapon. "Your telepaths," he said quietly. "The ones we captured and turned. They showed us something in your memories. Something about a place called Hiroshima." Aldridge nodded grimly. "August 6, 1945. We dropped an atomic bomb on our own species. 70,000 dead instantly. Twice that from radiation poisoning. We've carried that guilt for 800 years. And yet you survived it, learned from it, grew stronger. We had to. The alternative was extinction." Valmorak's secondary arms gestured to the bridge around them, where his crew worked desperately to keep life support functioning. "My people, we never learned to carry such burdens. Our telepathic abilities allowed us to share consciousness, to distribute pain across many minds until it became manageable. But humans, you carry your full weight alone. Not alone, Aldridge corrected. Together. Every human alive carries the memories of our worst moments and our greatest triumphs. We don't share the load telepathically, we share it by choosing to remember, to honor the dead by refusing to repeat their mistakes. The conversation was interrupted by Admiral Cortez's voice. Over the communication system, Marcus, I'm reading massive energy signatures throughout the debris field. Something's happening. Through the world ender's sensors. They watched as the wrecked ships began to move. Not under power, that was impossible, but drawn together by some external force. Human and Cytherian vessels alike drifted toward a common center, their hulls grinding against each other in a slow-motion collision that should have spelled disaster. Instead, something remarkable happened. Emergency airlocks that had been sealed began opening. Human engineers emerged to help repair Cytherian life support systems. Cytherian medics worked alongside human doctors to treat the wounded of both species in the face of shared extinction. The barriers between civilizations simply dissolved. This is impossible, Valmoric whispered, watching his own crew collaborate with their former enemies. They should be fighting. Humans and Cytherians have been at war for 3 years. No, Aldridge said, understanding flooding through him. Humans and Cytherians have been afraid of each other for 3 years. There's a difference. The realization was crystallizing across both fleets, transmitted through emergency frequencies, shared over jury-rigged communication networks. The truth spread like wildfire. They were the same. Both species had survived extinction events that should have destroyed them. Both had developed the technology and psychology necessary to endure the unendurable. Both had let fear turn them into conquerors instead of protectors. Your telepaths. Aldridge continued, they died because they expected to find alien thoughts. Instead, they found human memories and realized we weren't so different after all. The trauma was too familiar, too close to your own experiences. Valmoric was quiet for a long moment. Then, the Devourer's final transmission. It asked, what are you? But it wasn't asking about humanity. It was asking about itself, recognizing the same patterns of survival and adaptation that define Cytherian civilization. Around them, the improvised rescue operation continued. Ships that had been trying to kill each other hours earlier now shared power, atmosphere, and medical supplies. The boundary between human and Cytherian space became meaningless in the face of mutual survival. Admiral Cortez to all vessels came the transmission. We're establishing emergency protocols for joint evacuation. All surviving personnel, human and Cytherian, will be transported to the nearest habitable system for medical treatment and debriefing. No weapons, no warfare. No politics, just people helping people survive. Supreme War Leader Valmoric looked at Marcus Aldridge with something approaching respect. Your species fought like demons, but when the fighting stopped, you became angels of mercy. How is that possible? Because we remember, Aldridge replied. We remember what it's like to lose everything, and we choose not to let others experience that same loss, even our enemies. The evacuation took 36 hours. By the end, human and Cytherian crews were working so closely together that species became irrelevant. They were simply survivors, helping other survivors endure another day. As the last rescue ship prepared to depart the debris field, carrying refugees from both civilizations toward an uncertain but shared future, Marcus Aldridge stood on the observation deck watching the wreckage recede. What happens now? Asked Valmoric, who had chosen to accompany the human evacuation rather than return to his empire. Now we learn, Aldridge replied, we learn that the universe is big enough for both our species. We learn that survival doesn't require conquest. And maybe, if we're very lucky, we learn to carry each other's burdens instead of fighting each other's ghosts. Behind them, the Kepler Nebula held the remains of 2 fleets, and the birth of something entirely new, the first alliance between species who had both learned to weaponize their own survival. 6 months after the Battle of Kepler Nebula, Marcus Aldridge stood in the Unity Station's observation lounge, watching human and Cytherian children play together in the zero-gravity recreational pods. The sight still amazed him. To species that had tried to exterminate each other now sharing toys, laughter, and the innocent friendships that transcended xenobiology. The integration protocols are ahead of schedule, reported Dr. Elena Vasquez, the station's chief xenopsychologist and Admiral Cortez's younger sister. The first generation of joint species families has adapted remarkably well to cohabitation. Families, Aldrich mused. It was still a strange concept, humans and Cytherians choosing to raise children together, creating hybrid households that defied everything both species thought they knew about biology and culture. Through the transparistelle windows, the construction scaffolding of New Geneva stretched toward the local star. The combined colony ship was humanity's first joint venture, with the Cytherian Empire a massive habitat designed to house 500,000 beings. From both civilizations, its completion would mark the official end of the war and the beginning of something unprecedented in galactic history. The psychological integration studies are fascinating, Dr. Vasquez continued. Cytherian telepaths can now interface with human consciousness without suffering trauma, but only because they've learned to accept our emotional complexity instead of fighting it. Meanwhile, human negotiators report increased empathy and strategic thinking after extended contact with telepathic species. Aldrich nodded, remembering his own transformation, the rage that had defined him during the War, the cold fury that had made him humanity's most effective killer had evolved into something deeper and more sustainable. He still carried the weight of human history, but now it was shared with beings who understood the burden from their own experience. "Sir, you have a priority transmission from Earth Council," announced Lieutenant Park, one of the station's communication officers. Also, Supreme War Leader Valmorok is requesting a meeting regarding the Outer Rim situation. The Outer Rim, 3 star systems at the edge of known space, where other species have observed the human-Cytherian conflict and drawn their own conclusions. The Zephyrin Collective had attempted to exploit what they thought was mutual weakness, launching raids against both human and Cytherian colonies. They had not anticipated a joint response. Aldrich accepted the Earth Council transmission first. Chancellor Morrison's weathered face appeared on the holographic display, her expression carrying the weight of someone who had guided humanity through its darkest hours. "Marcus, I've reviewed the after-action reports from the Zephyrin engagement. Casualties? Minimal on our side. The Zephyrins lost approximately 60% of their raiding fleet before requesting negotiations. And the Cytherian response?" Supreme War Leader Valmorok handled the diplomatic contact personally. "Turns out that telepathic species have a significant advantage in negotiations. They can ensure absolute honesty from all parties involved." Morrison smiled grimly. The old human approach was speak softly and carry a big stick. The new approach seems to be speak truthfully and carry a telepathic ally. It was an accurate assessment. The Human-Cytherian alliance had become the most feared diplomatic entity in local space, not because of their military might, but because of their psychological impact. Species that tried to manipulate or deceive them found themselves facing negotiators who could read minds and warriors who had weaponized their own trauma. "What's the Council's position on the hegemony request?" Aldrich asked. "Approved. You and Valmorok have authorization to offer protectorate status to any species willing to accept alliance oversight. The galaxy seems to have decided that joining us is preferable to fighting us." After the transmission ended, Aldrich made his way to the station's diplomatic wing, where Supreme War Leader Valmorok maintained his offices. The former enemy commander had adapted well to peacetime leadership, though his approach to problem-solving remained distinctly Cytherian. "Marcus," Valmorok greeted him, his forearms manipulating data displays with practiced efficiency. "The hegemony representatives have arrived. They're concerned about our expansion, concerned enough to consider military action." Valmorok's mandibles clicked with what Aldrich had learned to recognize as amusement. "They attempted telepathic reconnaissance 3 hours ago. My staff allowed the intrusion and shared selected memories from both the Kepler Nebula engagement and the Zephyrin response. The hegemony delegation is now requesting emergency negotiations." It was becoming a pattern. Species throughout local space had watched humanity and the Cytherian Empire tear each other apart, then somehow transform mutual destruction into mutual prosperity. The psychological implications were staggering. The civilizations that had learned to weaponize their own survival now offered that same transformation to others. What are they offering? Full integration into the alliance structure, shared technological development, joint military cooperation, and most interestingly, access to our psychological protocols for trauma integration. Aldrich raised an eyebrow. They want to learn how to carry their own historical burdens. Apparently, the hegemony has its own extinction events to process: the synthetic uprising, the bioplague of 2387, the collapse of their original homeworld. They've been suppressing the memories for centuries, but watching our species integrate our trauma has convinced them that acceptance might be more effective than avoidance. Through the office's windows, they could see the latest arrivals at Unity Station refugee ships from a dozen different species, all seeking the stability and prosperity that the Human-Cytherian alliance represented. Former enemies working together, former rivals sharing resources, former strangers becoming family. Sometimes I wonder, Aldrich mused, if this was inevitable. If the universe needed a species stubborn enough to survive anything, and stupid enough to nearly destroy each other before learning to cooperate. Valmrak's response came with the harmonics that indicated deep telepathic consideration. Perhaps. Or perhaps the universe simply needed examples, demonstrations that survival and cooperation are not mutually exclusive concepts. A soft chime indicated another arrival. Through the station's external sensors, they watched as a massive ship translated from hyperspace, the New Covenant, humanity's most advanced vessel, escorting the Cytherian science ship toward the construction site of New Geneva, the first joint exploration mission, Valmrak noted, heading for the Andromeda approach to investigate the energy signatures. Your deep space monitors detected. Think they'll find anything interesting? They'll find what all our joint missions discover, that the universe is stranger and more wonderful than either species imagined alone. Later that evening, Aldrich found himself back in the observation lounge, watching the children play. A human girl was teaching a young Cytherian how to throw a ball in zero gravity, while her Cytherian sibling used his telepathic abilities to help her understand complex mathematical concepts. They were the first generation to grow up without the burden of species warfare, the first to see cooperation as natural rather than revolutionary. In their laughter and shared games, Aldrich could see the future not human or Cytherian, but something entirely new. Dr. Vasquez joined him at the observation window. The mortality statistics came in from Earth and the Cytherian homeworlds. Life expectancy is up 12% across both species since the alliance formation. Psychological trauma indices are down 60%. Even the birth rates are increasing. Turns out that not spending all your energy on survival leaves more time for living. Aldrich replied, the Xenop Psychology Department is calling it the survival paradox. Species that learn to help others survive inevitably become more capable of surviving themselves. Through the transparent aluminum, they watched as human engineers and Cytherian technicians worked side by side on New Geneva's outer hull, their coordination so seamless that species distinction became meaningless. Two civilizations that had nearly destroyed each other in their fear were now building something that would outlast both their original cultures. Marcus Aldrich smiled as he realized the final irony of their story. Humanity had always prided itself on being survivors, the species that refused to die, that weaponized its own trauma, that carried the weight of extinction and emerged stronger. But survival, they had learned, was not about being strong enough to endure alone. It was about being brave enough to help others endure alongside you. In the end, the greatest human weapon had not been their capacity for violence or their resistance to telepathic intrusion. It had been their ability to recognize themselves and their enemies and choose compassion over conquest. The war was over. The alliance was just beginning. And in the laughter of children who would never know species hatred, the future sang with possibilities that neither humanity nor the Cytherian Empire could have imagined alone. The screaming had stopped long ago. Now there was only the song shared between minds that had learned to carry each other's burdens, and stronger for the harmony they created together.